The strait is half a mile wide at its narrowest point. Only half a mile of water separating Europe from Asia, the Black Sea from the Mediterranean, the ancient world from the modern one. Every day, more than 40,000 ships pass through this channel. More vessel traffic than the Suez and Panama canals combined. Tankers carrying oil from the Caspian, grain ships from Ukraine, container vessels moving between ports that did not exist when this city was founded. 17 million people live on both sides of this water. They have different names for the city depending on which shore they grew up on. But they all live inside the same logic. Geography created this place, and geography has never let it go. Istanbul has been the capital of 3 empires. It has changed its name, its religion, its language, its political structure. It has been conquered by force, transformed by fire, reorganized by revolution. It has never been abandoned. Because abandoning it would mean giving up control of the most strategically valuable piece of water on Earth. And no power in history has ever been willing to do that. To understand Istanbul, you have to stop thinking about it as a city that made choices, and start thinking about it as a position that had choices made around it. The Bosporus Strait is not merely a body of water. It is a choke point, one of the few places on Earth where the movement of ships between major sea systems can be controlled from a single fixed location on land. Control this strait, and you tax every ship moving between the Mediterranean and the Black Sea. You decide who gets grain from the north and who doesn't. You determine which navy can project power into which sea. You hold a geographic lever that moves the economy of an entire hemisphere. Every empire that ever built itself around this position understood that the position was the empire. The city was the infrastructure through which the geography could be administered. This is why Istanbul has been rebuilt after every catastrophe rather than relocated. The geography does not move, and the logic embedded in that geography, control the strait, control the wealth, has remained constant across every political transformation the city has ever undergone. 3 empires, 3 religions, 3 names, 1 strait, 1 logic, 1 organism. But what does a position like this actually look like on the ground? What does it feel like to stand on a hill where 3 bodies of water meet, and understand that whoever holds this hill holds the movement of the world? Constantine understood it in 330 CE. The answer he gave changed the map of civilization for the next 17 centuries. The peninsula that anchors the old city of Istanbul is one of the most naturally defensible positions in the ancient world. Water on 3 sides. The Golden Horn to the north, a deep natural harbor capable of holding a fleet. The Bosporus to the east, the strategic corridor. The Sea of Marmara to the south. Only the western approach is accessible by land, and that approach runs across a narrow isthmus. When Constantine chose this site in 330 CE to relocate the center of the Roman Empire, he was not making an aesthetic decision. He was executing a military and economic calculation with almost no margin for error. The Western Roman Empire was under pressure from every direction. The capital in Rome was too exposed, too far from the eastern frontiers where the real threats were concentrated. A new capital needed to be defensible, connected to the empire's wealthiest provinces, and positioned to control the trade routes that funded the imperial military. The peninsula at the Bosporus satisfied all 3 conditions simultaneously. Constantine renamed an existing Greek settlement, Byzantium, and called his new capital Constantinople. The city of Constantine. He built walls, he built a harbor. He built a palace complex on the highest ground, commanding views of both the strait and the sea approaches. And then he built the Hippodrome, a stadium seating 100,000 people, positioned at the center of civic life. Not because Romans loved chariot racing, Because controlling the entertainment of a capital city's population was in the Roman world an act of political administration. The organism was designed from the beginning to manage density, wealth, and power simultaneously. For nearly 1,000 years after Constantine, Constantinople was the most powerful city in the Western world. Not merely politically, economically, the customs revenues from the Bosporus funded an imperial military that held back successive waves of pressure: Visigoths, Huns, Persians, Arabs, Bulgars, while the Western Roman Empire collapsed entirely and was not rebuilt. The Hagia Sophia, completed in 537 CE under Emperor Justinian, was not a church in the conventional sense. It was an engineering statement. Its dome, 32 meters in diameter, appearing to float above the nave on a ring of light, was the largest enclosed space in the world for nearly 1,000 years. No structure built before it had achieved this. The engineering required to support that dome, without the massive walls that typically carried such weight, was unprecedented. Justinian reportedly said, upon entering it for the first time, "Solomon, I have surpassed thee." The building was designed to communicate imperial supremacy through architectural impossibility, to make visitors understand that a civilization capable of building this was a civilization capable of anything. It worked. Constantinople grew to a population of perhaps 500,000 people at its peak, larger than any city in Europe would reach again for 7 centuries after the Western Roman collapse. The organism was not merely surviving. It was setting the terms of civilization for an entire hemisphere. No city that reaches this level of dominance believes it can be reversed. Constantinople had held for 1,000 years. It had also been slowly selling the one thing that made it irreplaceable. And the buyers were already inside the walls. By the 11th century, the structural pressures that had been accumulating beneath Constantinople's prosperity were becoming impossible to ignore. The empire that the city administered had been contracting for 400 years. Military campaigns to recover lost territory consumed revenues that the shrinking tax base could no longer reliably generate. The civil service that ran the imperial bureaucracy had grown too expensive for the economy supporting it. Political factions inside the palace competed for control of an institution whose reach was declining faster than its administrative complexity. The walls still stood. The Hagia Sophia still dominated the skyline. The harbor still functioned. But the organism was running a deficit, drawing on the accumulated reserves of 1,000 years of dominance to maintain a posture of power it could no longer fully sustain. The critical vulnerability was financial. To fund military campaigns, successive emperors had granted Italian merchant cities, Venice and Genoa in particular, extraordinary trading privileges inside Constantinople. These concessions transferred the commercial revenues of the Bosporus from the imperial treasury to foreign hands. The city was slowly selling the asset that made it valuable in order to fund the cost of defending it. The logic was circular, and it was accelerating toward a rupture. The rupture, when it came, did not arrive from the direction anyone expected. Not from Persia, not from the Arab world, not from the steppe. It came from an army that had left Europe carrying the cross of Christianity, headed, in theory, for Jerusalem. In 1204, the Fourth Crusade did not go to Jerusalem. It went to Constantinople. The precise sequence of decisions that redirected a European Christian army toward the capital of European Christianity is one of the most studied episodes in medieval history. Debt, political manipulation, commercial interest. The Venetians who financed the crusade and controlled its logistics had reasons to want Constantinople weakened. Whatever the cause, the result was unambiguous. The walls that had held against Attila, against the Persian armies, against the Arab fleets, against the Bulgarian Khans, were breached by allies. The city was sacked for 3 days. Treasures accumulated over 9 centuries were loaded onto Venetian ships. The Hippodrome's bronze horses ended up above the entrance to St. Mark's Basilica in Venice, where they remained for 800 years. Constantinople survived the sack. A Latin empire was established. Then a Byzantine restoration followed 57 years later. But the organism did not recover its previous strength. The sack of 1204 was not the killing blow. It was the structural weakening that made the killing blow possible. The organism survived another 250 years on the reserves that remained. Then a Hungarian engineer changed the arithmetic of what walls could withstand. And an Ottoman sultan was willing to pay what the Byzantine emperor could not afford. In 1453, Mehmed II arrived at the Theodosian Walls with something no previous attacker had possessed: artillery capable of destroying them. The great Hungarian engineer Urban had approached the Byzantine emperor first, offering to cast cannons for the defense of the city. The emperor could not pay his price. Urban went to Mehmed. The Ottomans paid. For 53 days, the largest cannons in the world fired against walls that had defined the limits of military possibility for 1,000 years. The walls had been built to withstand what was possible in the 5th century. Gunpowder had moved the boundary of the possible. When the walls finally broke, the Byzantine Empire, the eastern continuation of Rome, which had outlasted the Western Empire by 1,000 years, ceased to exist. What happened next was not what most conquerors did. Mehmed II did not burn the city. He did not expel its population. He rode to the Hagia Sophia, had a prayer recited inside it to mark its conversion to a mosque, and then issued decrees repopulating the city with craftsmen, merchants, and scholars from across the Ottoman domains. He understood that the value of Constantinople was not the city as it had been. It was the position, the strait, the harbor, the accumulated urban infrastructure that took centuries to build. Destroying that would have been destroying his own prize. The organism changed identity. It did not change location. Under Ottoman rule, Istanbul became what Constantinople had been, and then exceeded it. The Ottoman Empire at its peak extended from the gates of Vienna to the Persian Gulf, from the Crimea to the edges of Morocco. Istanbul administered this territory from the Topkapi Palace, a complex of courts and pavilions built on the exact tip of the peninsula where the Bosporus met the Golden Horn. The position was the same. The logic was the same. The revenues flowing through the Strait customs system were larger than they had been under the Byzantines, because the Ottoman trade network was larger. Suleiman the Magnificent commissioned the architect Sinan to build the Suleymaniye Mosque in the mid-16th century. Sinan, who had studied the structural engineering of the Hagia Sophia for decades, designed a building that responded to the Byzantine dome, not by imitating it, but by answering it. Two great domes facing each other across the same skyline, separated by a century of conquest, speaking the same architectural language. The new organism did not erase the old one. It built alongside it, on top of it, in dialogue with it. This is the pattern that defines Istanbul more than any other. Each cycle of power adds to the accumulated architectural and cultural sediment rather than clearing it away. The city becomes more layered with each transformation, and more impossible to fully understand without understanding all the layers beneath the current surface. In 1923, the new Turkish Republic moved the capital to Ankara. It was a deliberate rupture with the imperial past. Ankara was inland, Anatolian, unencumbered by the layers of Byzantine and Ottoman identity that saturated every street of Istanbul. Ataturk wanted a capital that belonged to the Republic, not to the empires. Istanbul lost its political function for the first time in over 1,500 years. It did not lose its economic one. The Bosporus still moved, trade still flowed. The city's position still generated the same commercial logic it had always generated. Without the administrative overhead of imperial governance, Istanbul reorganized around what it had always been beneath the imperial surface: a trading city, a port, a meeting point. What happened next was the most rapid demographic transformation in the city's history. Between 1950 and 2000, Istanbul's population grew from approximately 1 million to 15 million. Rural migrants arrived from Anatolia in waves that the city's infrastructure could not absorb. Informal neighborhoods, gecekondu, built overnight on hillsides above the historic districts, created a new layer of the city as dense and complex as anything the Byzantines or Ottomans had built, but constructed in weeks rather than centuries. The organism was absorbing a new kind of pressure. Not conquest, growth. For 17 centuries, every threat to the city came from outside it, from armies, from navies, from rival empires and rival faiths. The pressure building beneath Istanbul today is different. It is not coming from across the water. It is coming from 7 kilometers below the floor of it. But the greatest threat to Istanbul would not come from the number of people, nor from foreign armies. It was hidden in the silence, kilometers beneath their feet. When we look at Istanbul today, we see a city operating with extraordinary confidence. New bridges, a new airport that processed over 60 million passengers before the pandemic, a canal project proposed to create an artificial second Bosporus, bypassing the existing strait. Infrastructure investment at a scale the city has not seen since the Ottoman peak. Beneath all of it, 7 to 17 kilometers below the surface of the Sea of Marmara, the North Anatolian Fault is accumulating strain. This fault has produced a sequence of major earthquakes moving westward along its length through the 20th century, each one closer to Istanbul than the last. The 1999 earthquake at Izmit, 60 miles to the east, killed 17,000 people and collapsed thousands of buildings that had been constructed during the rapid growth decades when speed mattered more than seismic engineering. Seismologists estimate the probability of a major earthquake directly beneath or adjacent to Istanbul within the next several decades at somewhere between 30 and 60%. The city that has survived every external rupture in its history is now living above an internal one. Millions of the buildings added during the rapid growth of the 20th century were not built to withstand it. The organism has absorbed 17 sieges, 3 imperial collapses, and a republican revolution. The ground beneath it has not yet been asked to perform. Every city in this series has a mechanism. The mechanism that has kept Istanbul alive through 3 empires, 2 names, and 17 centuries of continuous pressure is simpler and more durable than any wall, any army, or any political system. It is the strait. As long as the Bosporus matters, as long as the movement of ships between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean carries economic and strategic significance, the position Istanbul occupies will generate the logic that sustains it. That logic has not weakened. If anything, the 21st century has intensified it. The energy resources of the Caspian and Central Asia move through this water. The grain that feeds North Africa and the Middle East moves through this water. The geopolitical competition between NATO and Russia plays out, in part, over the legal regime governing this water. The Montreux Convention of 1936, which governs military passage through the Bosporus, remains one of the most consequential pieces of international law in the world precisely because the geography it regulates has not diminished in importance since Constantine identified it 1700 years ago. The organism has changed everything about itself except its location. And its location has changed everything about the world around it. The next rupture will come. It always does. It may come from the ground. It may come from the geopolitical pressure building around the strait. It may come from within the political structure of the republic that replaced the empire. When it arrives, the organism will absorb it the way it has absorbed everything that came before, not by preventing the change, by surviving it. And when it emerges on the other side, different in name, different in structure, different in the identity it projects to the world, the strait will still be there. Half a mile wide, moving in both directions, impossible to ignore. The city that controls it will call itself whatever it needs to call itself. And the cycle will begin again.